Boo on the Loose from Disney Monsters Incorporated. James P. Sylvian was the top scarer at Monsters Incorporated. Scaring kids was an important job. Kids' screams kept the whole city running. Sully worked on the scare floor. He stood before a door and waited for the signal. The red light meant that he could open the door and scare the kid on the other side. Big scares meant big screams. Workers caught the screams. Then the factory turned the screams into energy. Gas for cars, power for lights. Sully was heading home at the end of his shift. As he walked past the scare floor, he saw a door. But all the doors should have been put away. Is anybody there? He said. He peeked inside the room. Boo! Something said. It was a little girl inside the monster world. Ah! Sully screamed. Children were like poison to monsters. Every monster knew that. Sully tried to put the girl back into her room, but she kept popping out. Kitty! She called to Sully. Sully had to do something. If anyone found out about her, he could lose his job. There was only one monster Sully could tell his secret to, his best friend, Mike. So Sully took the little girl home. He sneaked her out in his bag. Mike could not believe it. A kid in their world? Her name is Boo, said Sully. You named it, cried Mike. They had to get rid of the dangerous kid. So Mike came up with a plan. The next morning, they would drive her to the park and try to lose her. While she was sleeping, Sully and Mike peeked in on Boo. It's hard to believe she is dangerous, said Sully. Hey, that is my bear, said Mike. The next morning, Sully and Mike made a monster costume for Boo. Then they walked outside to Mike's car. Be careful, said Mike. Do not let that kid touch anything. When they got to the park, Sully and Mike got out of the car. Mike went to open the door, but Boo had locked herself in. Mike was very angry. We have to get her out, he said. Sully had an idea. He opened the trunk and looked inside. He found a spare tire. Time to play, he said. Sully put Mike in the middle. He rolled Mike all around. Fun, Sully said. Yeah, fun, Mike grumbled. But Boo did not get out of the car. Next, Sully took out the car jack. He cranked Mike up and down. Boo still did not come out. She was too busy playing with Mike's bear. Next, Sully swung Mike around. Don't you want to play, Boo? Sully asked. But nothing worked. Boo waved from inside the car. What do we do now? Mike shouted. Just then, a monster butterfly flew past the car window. Boo smiled and pointed. Then she opened the car door and ran after it. The butterfly landed on a fountain. Boo tried to catch it, but the butterfly was too fast. Then the butterfly flew into the woods. Boo followed it. Mike grabbed Sully's arm. Now's our chance, Sully, shouted Mike. Let's go! Mike tried to start the engine, but the car would not start. We're out of gas, said Mike. But Sully was not listening. He was thinking about Boo. He missed her already. Then Silly had an idea. If Mike thought they needed Boo, Silly could get her back. We need to find Boo, Silly said. Her scream will start the car. Silly ran into the woods. Boo, Silly called. I have your teddy bear. Silly did not see her anywhere. Boo, where are you? He called. Was she gone forever? Kitty? Said a small voice. Hi, Boo, said Silly. Boo ran right up to him. Boo hugged Silly's leg. Silly smiled. Boo did not seem dangerous at all. Silly walked back to the car. You're holding its hand, Mike cried. Silly smiled. I know, he said. I feel okay, though. Silly helped Boo into the car. Then he got in too. Now we need some scream, said Mike. Okay, Silly, said Mike. You are the best scarer at Monsters Incorporated. Do your stuff. Silly looked at Boo. She smiled back at him. He opened his mouth to roar, but he could not do it. He just could not scare little Boo. Just scare it now! Yelled Mike. He banged his head on the steering wheel. Honk! Went the horn. Ouch! Said Mike. Boo laughed. Tee hee hee! The engine started with a roar. Mike and Celia looked at each other. How did that happen? Mike looked at Boo. Okay, she can stay for now, he said. But just remember, that is my bear. The end.